Hi guys, what's going on, and welcome to the second part of IOM random map scripting. Before we start, I have to tell you some things. First, we're in Notepad++. We won't code in Visual Studio. Visual Studio was just for you to see the actual coding and what every command does. But for simplicity, it is easier to program in Notepad++ or the normal Notepad only for Age of Mythology, because the files we're going to save are not C++ files. They are XS and XML, so it's easier to program them into Notepad++ because we can go to file and save and we can save them as XML files or XS files, so that way it will be more easier. I chose Notepad++ just because the keywords are highlighted in other colors, so for you it will be visually easier to see them. But Notepad++ does not debug your code, and so if you have an error, you will see the error in Age of Mythology, not in Notepad++. Now the second thing I want to tell you is that we are going to copy and paste a lot of codes just because they are very long, and the purpose of this tutorial is not how to create a random map from scratch. It is rather how to modify existing maps. You will be able to create random map from scratch after we end the tutorial, but the purpose is not this. So yes, and I just did the previous tutorial for you to know what each command does, so you don't modify them and don't know what are the consequences and so on and so forth. So for you to better understand what we are copying and pasting. But it will be a lot of copying and pasting, and you will see the code is like 1000 lines, I don't know how many. But if you take a look at the random maps of Age of Mythology, they are in the RM2 folder or whatever folder. Yes, they are very long. We're going to do simple maps, and from there you can add many functions to modify it and make it look better. And also, the for is written differently in IOM scripting language. You will see the syntax. It's the same syntax, but they remove the I equal I plus 1 I or I plus plus. They consider that the condition, if you want the counter I, they think it will be always incremented by 1. So I equal I plus 1, you can either write it or don't write it, it's the same thing. Also, I forgot to tell you from the previous editor that if you see something written like this, 2 slashes and a line, it is called a comment. A comment is not compiled when the code is compiled, so the compiler will skip it and it won't think it's a command or anything. A comment don't interfere with your code. It's like it's not there. The whole purpose is to provide an explanation to the code. It's like a syntax that tells you what the code below it is about, but it doesn't add any functionality to your code. It's like it's not there. So don't worry if you ever see them. Ignore them. Just ignore them. And also there is a link that I will provide in the description that tell you all the functionalities of every function in IOM, all the predefined functions, and what are their arguments, and also what the return type is, if it's a void, a bool, or anything like this. So be sure to check it to understand more what I'm talking about. And also the final thing I want to tell you is that every bit of code where you're going to copy and paste is provided in the description. So without further ado, let's get started. As you can see here, each random map has an XS file, which the XS file is responsible for its functionality. As you can see, it's a big code. And we have the XML file, which is a short code of 2 or 3 lines maximum, which is responsible for the look in the random map menu button. So here, the XML file is responsible for having your map displayed there. And also, as you can see, each button has a description down there, and also a name, random all, Acropolis, etc., and an image. So we're going to modify them in the XML file. So create a map, create a file, save it, save as XML. So save as XML, be sure to select all types, and go and copy paste this map to this XML file to this map XML file. And here we're going to modify a few things. So we're going to change details to detail name. This way we can, if you want the details like the description of the map and the name are stored into IDs. However, we will not create an ID to be able to store the description. We will directly modify the description. So here, when you want to modify the description is modified between these two quotation marks. So you write your description. For example, this is an easy map, whatever you want. And here you want to modify the display name. Also, we don't want to give it a unique ID because we don't know what the ID means. So here we're going to remove the ID and modify its display name. So whatever you want, tutorial map. And save it and don't modify anything else. Yeah, so that's all we are going to do to the XML folder file, and now we're going to modify the access file or create an access file of our own. Yes. So now we are going to make our access file. Be sure to copy and paste the first set of code that you can see right there. And also, when you are saving your file, be sure to save them in RM2. I think, the custom map in RM. So if you want to use it for a normal Age of Toji, you save it in RM. Or if you want to use it for the Age of Toji Titans, be sure to save them in RM2. And also save the access file, the same name of your XML file but .access. And be sure to select all types. And then we're going to explain what this code does. So here I told you that every line of code you want to write is going to be inside the void main. So here it is. Here we declare a variable called player tiles. Its initial value is going to be 8,500. Now we have an if statement. This if statement checks if our map size is large. If it's large, then we are going to increase the number of player tiles. Now we don't increase it, we set it to a different value. So if we select the map size large, it will enter the if statement and the number of player tiles will be modified. That is what we want. That is a very logical thing to do. Now we are going to do a bit of math calculation. You don't need to understand the calculation, but if you analyze it, you know that we are setting an integer called size equal to times the square root of number of non-Gaia players times player tiles divided by 0.9. Now what this does, as you can see, the size of the map is proportional to the number of non-Gaia players, or in other words, the number of players, because usually you don't count Gaia. And it's also proportional to player tiles. So the more players you have, and the bigger the map is, the larger, the bigger the size of the map will be. So it's very logical. And but if you want the factors here, it's nothing to be really aware of. And here we are calling a function called rm set map size. So we are setting the size of the map to the size and size. So each, if you want the width and the length of the map will be size and size. If the width and the length are equal, it will form a square, and that is exactly what we want. And here we call another function which will initialize the terrain of the map. We are initializing the terrain of the map, and we are giving it an argument of a string. A string is usually written between two quotations, and we are choosing the grass dirt 25. You can go to editor and see all the terrain types and modify it if you want. Be sure to type them correctly. And to check if our map is working, we go to AUM, more editor, and file new, and we select custom map. And as you can see, we have made a map. This is our new random map, but it's boring. It has only a terrain of grass dirt and nothing else. So we'll modify it now. Now go ahead and copy paste the second part of the code. In this part, we are going to make a gold mine for every player. So here we start by defining a unique ID to our gold mine. The ID is going to be for starting gold. So we are going to provide an ID for each type of gold. Now we are going to focus on the starting gold. And also every object you want to implement in Age of Toji, whether if it's a settlement, a gold mine, or a forest, or anything like this, it has to have a unique ID. In order to make this, you call the function rm create object definition, and you give it the arguments, which you can see right there. So basically we are copying and pasting the savannah or any other random map Acropolis, and yes, but this is what it does. So every object must have a unique ID, and in order for us to create a unique ID, we won't bother by, for example, 1, 2, or 3, or 4 to make them consecutively. No, Age of Toji has a predefined function and they make them unique, so we're going to use it. And we are going here to add an object definition. Now we have created starting gold, but we haven't told Age of Toji whether if it's a medium mine or a large gold mine. So here we are going to tell you that it is a large gold mine. If it's a medium gold mine, we go and search how to write medium gold. Oh, I already searched it, so this is how you write a medium gold. Now we are going to write a gold mine, and here it's going to be the number of gold mine per ID. It's going to be 1, and this is use this argument, keep it 0. You can see what it does in the site. Here we are going to set the minimum distance for our gold, starting gold, so it's going to be 20, and the maximum distance is going to be 125. Notice that we have minimum distance and maximum distance, so that means the distance between gold mines is random, and play around with these variables to see the distance you wish. And here we are making a gold mine for each player. If you want to add more, you can tweak this number. And here we are going to test that everything works. So file, new, custom map, and as you can see, the map generates 4 gold mines that are separated by a minimum distance of 25. Now, you cannot exactly measure this distance, but go ahead and play with these variables, you know how it looks. And yeah. Now go ahead and copy paste the third part of our code. Here we are going to make an area. An area is like if you painted the map within a boundary limit. So it's an area where you have different terrain types. So every object in Age of Toji is going to have a unique ID. So you start int ID equal rm create area. We're going to create it in the center. You can modify it. I think I don't know which value it takes. I'll put them on the screen after. And we are going to set an area with the size 0.2, 0.2. You can go ahead and modify them. Also the location, it's going to be 0.5, 0.5. Go ahead and modify every bit of code. There is also many code you can go ahead and do with the area. So yes, here you can see all the functions. You can go ahead and play with the area. Be sure to try them all. And here we are going to set the area type, terrain type to be sand A. And here don't forget to call the function rm build area, or else you will declare it but it will not be built. So go ahead in Age of Toji and see our changes. And as you can see, we have here the 4 gold mines, and here we have our area. Before we continue any deeper, I want to explain what are constraints. Constraints are an integer, but they are mainly used to prevent something to be either very far from something or either very near something. Like, for example, we don't want 2 gold mines to be on top of each other. We don't want a settlement to be on top of a gold mine. To avoid all of this, we use constraint. They will keep something at a minimum distance from another thing. Here, for example, we add a corner constraint. We want to keep something, we want to keep all things that have this constraint at a minimum distance of 15 meters from the corner. So this is the syntax. We call the function, we give it a unique name. Be sure to have it unique. And and everything with the class ID corner. I will explain what our class is in a bit. But we want everything that is within the class corner to have a minimum distance from everything to be 15. Or like in this instance, we want everything to avoid gold by a distance of 30. When you see constraints, they are basically used to limit the randomness of your map. We don't want anything to spawn on top of each other. They are usually used to keep a minimum distance from each other. Like every unit will have a minimum distance from each other. So this is why they are used. Before we move on and copy and paste the fourth part of our code, we'll talk a bit about classes. What are classes? Classes are generally used when you want to regroup many objects into a single category. For example, all the gold mines in the map, the starting gold, the middle of the map gold mines, etc. If you want to regroup them all in a category, we'll use classes. When we copy and paste the fourth code, we'll explain it in a bit more details. Now go ahead and copy paste the fourth part of our code. Now your first reaction will be, wow, this code has expanded extensively. But let's break it into pieces. Here in this code, we are going to spawn all the gold available in the map to all the players. Now notice your code won't work as intended before we declare all the players, which we will do in the next copy and paste. But for this one, stay with me. So here we are declaring the gold constraints, which I've explained earlier. Constraints are used to have objects separated by a certain distance, to not have gold mines on top of each other. So here we are making the first constraint avoid gold. So we don't want anything to be on top of the gold mine. We want to avoid gold by a distance of 30. Here we declare a constraint also short avoid gold. This avoid golds by a short distance. So for example, if you want gold near your town center, you want them to avoid the town center but by a short distance, but not by a very far distance. Or else your gold mine would be out of the map or very far, you can't take advantage of it. If it's your starting gold, then yeah. And the far avoid gold is to avoid the gold that is very near your town center. Yeah, so under there we are creating all the gold mines we will have to make for this map. The first are the starting gold mine, which will be always have its number B1. The index for a gold mine small is gold mine small, as you can see like this. But for the gold mine large, it's only gold mine. So you will notice the same pattern of declaring object around every copy and paste. For this copy, the previous copy and paste, we had this 4 lines, and they will be nearly the same for every copy and paste. So first you give an ID to your object you want to spawn, then you declare which object you want to spawn and how much of its number. Always set it to 1, and then when you spawn the object, tell that you want to spawn more than 1, as you will see in a bit. Here we are declaring the minimum distance and the maximum distance for your object. Also we are doing the same thing, but here we are spawning the medium gold. Medium gold are not medium gold mines, they are golds like located at the middle line of your map, so they're not very far from your town center, but they're a bit further than the starting gold mine. And here also we are creating the gold mine. Now we want to avoid the gold mine on top of each other, and here we are doing the far gold, and now we want to avoid the gold mine from a very far distance, because the far gold will be very far from your town center. And the same syntax for the defining minimum distance and maximum distance. Here we are spawning the starting gold. This is the first object, and when we don't specify the number, like here we haven't specified, it will be only 1. Here we are spawning the medium gold mines, but here we are the number of the medium gold mine will be between 1 or 2 for each random map. It's not between each player, it's for each instance of your map. So each map you will either have 1 medium gold mine or 2 medium gold mine. Random int, it means it's a random number between 1 and 2. And the far gold mine will be between 2 and 4 for each map. So it's called a random map after all, so you have to take into account some probabilities and RNG, random number generators. And yeah, so this is all I needed to explain for this first part. And if you go ahead and test this map, now as I told you, the behavior won't be the one you expected, because we haven't declared players yet. So you may have less gold mines than you think you would. So I think there we have less than we should. I don't know how many players we are playing. I haven't checked. It's a 2v2, so there definitely should be more than this amount of gold mines. But don't worry, after we declare the players, all those things will be back to normal. So here we are in the 5th part of this tutorial, and this is the most interesting one. Here we are spawning a starting town center for every player, and 2 settlements that he can grab later. So how do we do this? If you noticed in the previous part, we had like a bug. It's not really a bug, where gold mines were near the corner and weren't spread out like it should be in a normal random map. This is because they don't belong to any player. We haven't defined players yet. So here we define players like this. Now this if statement, I think it's a bit useless. I copied it from the Savannah, but I think it's useless because if we have like 12 players, so I don't know what happens. So yes, you can keep it or leave it. And here we have here we are spacing apart the teams. Like if you want your teammate to be closer than you can go and decrease this number. If you want them to be further than you, like if you want a map like Valley of the Kings or Megalopolis, so you can decrease this number. If you want it like another map like Savannah, for example, you can keep this number or increase it. And the second line is placing. This is the line which we are placing the players. So here we are placing the player in a circular form. These you can tweak these arguments. I think they space it apart even more. And here is the rotation of the player. Also, you can mess with this. And we can start talking about the settlements. Here we have made 3 constraints for the settlement. Here we don't want the settlement to be too near each other, so we have a short avoid settlement. Here we have a far avoid settlements, so settlements won't be too far from each other, so your enemy won't be able to grab your town center. And here we don't want objects to be very far, starting object to be very far from your starting town center. So this is why we made a class, we're using it there. And we don't want like ghost, gold mine to be very far from your town center. And we go down to see where we spawn the settlements. Here we are placing the settlements for every player, but there we're using if statements to add a fair location to our settlements, so they won't be very far from each other. So this is like tweaking a bit the location of your settlements and giving them a bit of randomness. So yes, you can go up and mess with these numbers. And here we are, there we place the starting settlement, and there we are placing the 2 settlements that your player or enemy can grab. So yes, we do this by first checking if we have found a fair location. Then we create the settlement, the empty settlement, and then we add the object settlement, we add 1. And for every player, here we are looping for every player, and here we are looping for the number of fair locations, which is usually 2 because you have 2 settlements. And here we are placing the settlement at the location. Here is the ID, which means we are placing the settlement. Object can be anything. And here is the index of your player, because we're looping for every player, so each player will have 2 settlements. And these are the fair locations where we can place our settlement. And yeah, this is a piece of code we are going to write. And there, if we want to check our random map, by the way, you can check them in the random map there. And if we go and select it, as you can see, we have a working random map with 2 settlements for each player, and they are not very far apart. Each player get a starting gold mine there and there, which is also not too far from your settlement, and also they are given a gold mine, yes.